obviously because I've written about the Mariner, I've got a real sense of how important this poem, which is over 200 years old, is still. So what drew you to it?
So a few different things. I wrote it a few years ago, and I guess initially just the drama of the story. I mean, obviously there's certain lines that you know, but then you kind of go and find out what's the story they're from. And I just love the fact that the length of it was ideal for kind of this kind of piece, about kind of 70-minute piece. But just the fact that you've got this central character who just tells this amazing story, and in this incredible language, and just brings these scenes kind of in front of you, and I just thought it would be something you would not need to do much with. I think you said earlier that you've actually just delivered it as a poem, as a kind of dramatic.
Yes, it works incredibly well as a story, but there's a kind of, one of the things I found is a kind of strange paradox about it. If you did a 3-minute plot summary, it would be like the world's most unlikely story.
Yes, yeah.
Why should you do that? Why should you? Unlikeliness or weirdness of the surface narrative, I think everybody who gets drawn into the story, whether it's through reading the poem or looking at the illustrations or anything, suddenly realises that it's also about them. That there's something about the height and the depth, about being lost, being stuck, being trapped in repetition. I mean, when I wrote about this, I mean, the two things that came out, I talked about the relevance of it to Coleridge's own life, but actually the two of the things that came out for me, which are much more, as it were, important topics now, is there's a lot here about what we would now call PTSD, and about sort of survivor guilt, and the idea of the person who makes it out of a horror but can't get rid of it in their mind.
Yeah.
When he says, the many men so beautiful and they all dead did lie, and 1,000 slightly things lived on and said, did I? How do I cope with that? And the sudden repetitions and flashbacks, and how do I make some good out of this? How do I honour those I lost? All those are big questions now for so many people coming out of trauma. So that was one. But an even bigger thing was the environmental thing, and not just a vague, quick check. Is this the environment? It was the real sense that here's, if you think about it, it's astonishing. It's set in an Antarctic realm. The deed happens in the midst of ice, and there's the question of opening up a passage through the ice. Human beings blunder into this area for the first time and unleash unimaginable forces which they hadn't really thought about. And then, there's a spirit, there's a polar spirit, whose job is to look after the entire web of life, and who, as it were, exacts a revenge on those who offended against it. Then how do we what can we do? And the sense that the way out for the Mariner is actually, to use a modern term that was not available to Coleridge, is to abandon speciesism, to stop thinking that we're the only privileged beings on the planet. And he rediscovers this idea, the prayer of best, or the love of best, all things, both great and small, that he Lord who loveth us, he made them love all. And that really was a powerful thing for Coleridge himself. I've just been looking at some of the very last things he wrote, including his annotations to the Book of Common Prayer, and he's got a bit about how to receive communion, Johnson, and he suddenly starts riffing on the idea that God created every single thing, and that this isn't just about private salvation, this is about a care for every creature. Everything is made in the Word. It's still there, same as an old man. So, and the fact that it turns on an albatross in this book,
Well, I know you're interested in that because of the...
Yes, as a zoologist, and I went to New Zealand once and actually saw albatrosses in the wild, and it's just extraordinary how serene and majestic they are.
Yes. I actually saw one once as a small child as well. We sailed, I was born in Africa, and we sailed out of Southern Africa and back up to England every year. And I dedicated the book to my mother, who used to recite bits of the Mariner to me when I was a little boy. The white fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. And so I dedicated this book to her, and I went up to, she's 100 now, so I'm still going strong. So I went up with some trepidation to see if Mum liked my homework. She read it, and she said, "So do you remember the albatross?" I said, "No." And she told me that one time when we were on board ship sailing off the Cape of Good Hope, so in south of the southern bit of South Africa, we saw this great white speck, and an albatross came and flew really, really close and just lit up one of the bits of the ship looked at us and flew off. And of course my mum immediately started reciting the poem. She actually would. And so I realised, I was a small boy, until my mother reminded me, I didn't realise that memory was buried there in the poem.
Presumably he hadn't seen an albatross.
No, he hadn't. He had not seen an albatross. He hadn't even been to sea. I mean,
which is just...
Yeah, he did go shortly afterwards. I mean, one of the things I say in this, is that in some ways, he kind of wrote the poem first and then lived it. And gradually it became an emblem for him of things. But he has a wider point to make. He finally published it under his own name just over 200 years ago in 1817. I mean, it came out anonymously in the late 1790s, but he kept tweaking it in the 1817 version. And alongside it, he published another book, which is largely about the poetic imagination and why would we make up stories? Are they surely that they're false? And he says, no, we must procure for these shadows of imagination. He says we have a willing suspension of disbelief, that's his phrase, that procures for these shadows of imagination. That procures for these shadows of imagination that willing suspension of disbelief, which for the moment constitutes poetic faith. And he says what we do is we transfer from our inward nature the life that clothes these shadows of imagination. But at one point in that book he says the way the poetic imagination works and the arts generally, he says it's a bit like the chrysalis of the horned fly. It's when it's evolving. It leaves room in its involucrum for antennae yet to come. So the little squidgy thing doesn't have the antenna yet, but it knows enough somehow instinctively to hold open a shape into which the antenna will grow. And I think that's part of Coleridge's strong case for the imaginative arts. That for all of us, we're still always learning. Science is moving slowly, but it gets there. But sometimes we have an imaginative scientist to have these imaginative and we say, just suppose this, let me hold open a shape for you. And then gradually our other ways of knowing grow into it. And I think this poem is just such a shape. It's a narrative shape that holds a whole series of truths which we half know but don't fully know yet. And the more we enter into it, the more we get to know those things. And that's why I'm really delighted to see any other, artistic presentation of it. And Coleridge loved music and, wrote well about music. Of course, music comes into the poem quite a lot. And the sound of instruments and bells and song. He didn't live to see half of the creative responses. He never saw the beautiful Gustave Doré illustrations. Though he did see some very early ones. But I think he'd be delighted to feel that his bit of artistic shaping has itself provided a shape that others can make something around.
Do you find that kind of playing this character, because obviously the character is kind of fleshed out, I suppose, as it goes through, but is it?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm finding is actually the poem is moving me more and more the more I do, and then part of that's obviously your music, which is just beautiful. But and it's particularly that ecological, the ecological angle and how desperately important that has now become. And I think that one of the final lines of the piece is the moment that his face I see. I know the man who must hear me, and to him my tale I tell. It's something. We need to urgently hear this story now.
Yeah, that's stopping you. I mean, the poem literally begins with somebody being stopped in their tracks. And trying to get away from what they regard as an embarrassing street person, and then realising, oh no, wait a minute. This is my story. And I mean, the famous last lines about a sadder and a wiser man he rose tomorrow morn. That's kind of plays into the whole notion we need to think about, which is an inconvenient truth. Nobody wants to be ticked off by Greta Thunberg. She's bloody good at ticking off. But the fact is that she's right and we're wrong. And that it's taken a 16-year-old to cut through the bluster. Now, in some senses, a lot of what she has to say is not welcome at all. In another way, it's extremely welcome because we're finally having a wake-up call. And literally, this poem ends with a wake-up call, and it's a sadder and a wiser man. He rose the morrow morn. The last word of this poem, which is full of these nighttime horrors, is actually morn. It's about morning. It's about doing something, changing something.
It's actually very uplifting, I find.
Yeah, it is.
It's
Yeah,
very
it is.
uplifting.
But it's only uplifting because it's dared to kind of go down into the depths.
Yeah.
I think that's